This is Distant Replay.
Welcome into Distant Replay. I'm Ben George alongside Mike Noto for part 2 of our story on Joe Son. You might not be familiar with him, but he did have an MMA career, was in an Austin Powers film, had a small role there, but did perform in Hollywood. But his story is pretty dark, pretty disturbing. If you missed part 1, we went through the crime itself, how it all unfolded. This episode's about the investigation, how over a decade later, this finally came to a conclusion thanks to forensics, DNA. It's a pretty fascinating look into technology and pretty remarkable. Everything was able to come together and they were able to get a conclusion to this brutal crime, even if it took a long amount of time. So today, this is part 2 of our Joe Son story.
So the next step here, Ben, is to get into the investigation. So what they do is, now you'll see like a common thread throughout this whole ordeal is that she shows beyond courage and being brave. I know we always talk about this every episode we do, but they don't find these guys without her. Bottom line,
right.
She played a very integral part in everything. Whether it was remembering where the cigarette butt was, she also gave them very accurate composite drawings, descriptions of what the men looked like. So they're able to make very accurate composite drawings, which would help the investigators down the line. They also ran DNA from her body and clothes. The good thing is that they ran DNA. The bad thing is, in 1990, DNA was relatively new, right? So remember, the first time I had ever heard of DNA, Ben, and I'm sure you're the same, is during the O.J. Simpson trial, right?
Yeah.
Remember, the O.J. Simpson trial is 4 or 5 years after this, okay? So DNA is a thing, but the issue is there's not a huge database of subjects to compare the DNA to.
Yeah, it's brand new, yeah.
It's brand new, right? So they're working the DNA lead. They have the composite drawings that they've released to the media. They carved in her backside the initials SOS. They said during the attack they were members of a gang called the Sons of Samoa. So it was a local, really vicious gang. Mm-hmm. The investigators investigated that angle and determined it was a red herring, that it was something done to throw investigators off the scent, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, the DNA will become very valuable in the years to come, but it's not enough to make It's not enough to make a connection at this time. But there's a lot of DNA.
Okay.
So they know when someone does match it, they're going to be able to kind of link it up. Okay.
Right.
It took, now this woman is living in California. She then moves away, gets married, starts a family. It took 18 years for them to get a DNA hit.
Damn.
That DNA hit came back to Joe Son.
Wow.
Right? Not only, right, is he identified through DNA, they then put a photo array together, right? So we have the DNA. She looks at a photo array of I think it's 6 photos usually in those, and she identifies him right away. He was picture number 5, and she was I don't even need to look at picture number 6 because I know that's him.
Wow.
And she was correct with the photo identification as well. Now this is 2008.
Yeah.
Right. So you say, okay, it is incredible. It's 18 years, this lady had to live with the fact that not one of her rapists, but 2 of them were on the street. She had to move because of it.
Yeah. So how do they get the DNA?
So great question, because this is crazy too. This case may have never been solved. The only reason he was in the database is because he kicked in the car door of his roommate's car, and somehow that qualified as a felony.
Huh.
And as a part of the plea deal, he agreed to submit his DNA.
Wow.
He must have either not thought or thought he was in the clear with what happened here and voluntarily submitted his DNA as a part of a plea deal.
That's an interesting plea deal. Is that normal? Why would they ask for DNA in a case like that?
Maybe to get it in the database.
Yeah, I guess.
Maybe it's standard for a felony, hey, let's get it in the database. Because you hear that's how a lot of these crimes get solved.
Yeah, I guess that makes
years
sense.
later, they get a match of the system, The system is only as good as the number of DNA profiles that are in it, you know? So at this point, They start doing research on Joseph's son, Joe's son, as we've been calling him. And they find out he's been actively fighting in MMA all these years. He's in that Austin Powers movie. So that's where it becomes known, is like Austin Powers, actor, linked to, 18-year-old rape or whatever.
Right.
Because remember, we're in 2008. So we're not that far removed from the Austin Powers movies.
Mm-hmm.
When he's questioned, he denies involvement. Okay. He says, I wasn't involved. It's disgusting what you're describing. I didn't do it. Okay. Well, they have the DNA, so they charge him with rape and kidnapping anyway. You have a new district attorney, right, that is literally, he described it as he was on the job for like 30 minutes and randomly got assigned this case.
Oh, geez, okay? Wow.
Yeah, wild, right? So he gets assigned this case, and he says, okay, we have someone we have under arrest. They're not admitting to anything. We have to try to identify this other person, right? The other person involved. We have Joe's son. We need his accomplice as well. His focus turns to trying to identify that person, and they release a picture of Joe, like a present-day picture of Joe, along with the sketch of the second guy to the media.
Okay.
Trying to hope like it drums up some memories, even though it's 18 years later.
Yeah.
Okay? About a week after they let this circulate, they get a tip from someone who says, hey, I knew Joe in high school. I have no idea. I have no knowledge of this crime and what happened. But the guy in the sketch looks like one of his friends, a guy named Santiago Gaitan. Okay? Like, hey, these guys used to hang around in high school. The sketch looks like him. You may want to look into him. Okay? So now they need to get some DNA of this Santiago Gaitan to try to compare with the DNA that they have. Right?
Right, yeah.
So they surveil him. Shortly after they start to surveil him, they see him leave his apartment. He's drinking like a bottle of soda. He throws the bottle of soda in the garbage can. As soon after he leaves, the law enforcement comes out, grabs the bottle and bag it. They test the DNA, and it's a 100% match.
Jeez. Technology, man, it's crazy. So
it's
awesome.
nuts, isn't it? So now this guy had moved on. He had a wife. He had a family, etc. And now his DNA comes back as a match. So we have Joseph's son, Santiago Gaitan, with their DNA linking them to the rape of this woman. Rape and really kidnapping and a lot more than just rape, okay? Terrible crime.
Yeah.
Essentially, the DA starts to think a little bit more and says that the rape and kidnapping charges, unfortunately, have a statute of limitations on them, okay? So basically, a good way to think of it, Ben, is if the crime doesn't carry a sentence of life in prison, then there's a statute of limitations on it.
Okay. I don't think I've ever realized that, yeah.
So maybe this is just in California.
Okay.
So he basically hunkers down and says, based on what they did to her, what else can I charge them with that would not have a statute of limitations? So what he comes up with is torture.
Okay.
Torture can carry a life sentence in prison, and there's no statute of limitations. Okay? So that's what he charges them with. Based on what I described, what was done to her, it definitely fits. Okay? No question about it. Santiago Gaitan's attorney comes forward to cut a deal. He admits to everything that happened, tells the story about what happened, which matches the victim's story. He gets 17 years in prison. All right?
Okay.
Joseph's son will not admit what he did and goes to trial. Now, what this means, as we've discussed a bunch of times, Ben, is when it's something like this goes to trial, now the victim has to testify, right?
Right.
Which a lot of these victims have a lot of trouble doing. And to my amazement, I think to yours, like, it seems more often than not they do testify. And that was the situation in this case. She testified to every single detail that happened, to the point that jurors were crying, other people in the court were crying. It was like a very emotional scene, essentially, played out in court.
Yeah, I'm surprised she can remember a lot of the details. Like, I feel like that's the case where you suppress so much, right?
Yeah, maybe it's just one of those things so traumatic. It's kind of, maybe she's just been thinking about it over and over and over again for now, at this point. We're in 2010, 2011 at this point. It's 20 years of her life. Son doesn't help himself. He has outbursts during the trial. Occasionally, like, when people would say what happened or describe different things to do with the crime, he would call them liars. Just not making things any better for himself. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. They have a guilty verdict for torture. They sentence him to 7 years to life. So now this lady's thinking he gets 7 years to life, so he could get out. This Santiago Gaitan got 17 years, so could he eventually get out? You know what I mean? She gets like nervous all over again.
Yeah, of course.
Well, within a very short time of being in jail, he's accused of killing his cellmate.
Damn.
So he had a cellmate who was basically in jail for 2 years for violating some kind of order he had to stay away from a minor that he had sexually assaulted.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy, he killed his cellmate by beating him to death, punching him, kicking him. They described it as like they went to his cell and they saw Joe washing his hands with all blood on them in his cell.
Damn.
While like his cellmate laid there dead in his bunk. Okay?
Dude is evil.
Yeah, so he ends up getting life in prison without the possibility of parole in light of getting convicted of manslaughter of his cellmate. Okay? So where we're at now is son is in prison without the possibility of parole. Gaitan was eligible for parole in 2018 from what I read. I could not find anything that either confirmed he was in prison or that he had been let go.
Wow.
So I couldn't find anything anywhere because the big name from this situation was Joe's son.
Yeah.
Not only because he was in that movie and he was an MMA fighter, but he was also the more brutal of the two during the attack. Mm-hmm. So he was kind of like the headliner, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't find, if any of our listeners can find any information, I tried to look it up every way you can possibly look it up. And I could not find anything definitive. Okay. You know, the victim she ended up getting actually a couple years after the trial was over. So the trial ended and they got sentenced in 2011. In 2014, she got like diagnosed with a really advanced case of breast cancer.
Wow.
As of the last interview I saw with her was in 2016, and the cancer was in remission. But again, it's tough to look her up because we don't have her name, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm not sure about where she's at in terms of her cancer diagnosis. Like I said, she had moved out of California at this point. But that is the true crime story of Joseph's son and the incident he was in, the two incidents. I mean, if you count, if you also want to talk about what he did in jail.
Yeah.
The two incidents involving him, I can't help to think there was more incidents involving him throughout the years. I mean, what are the odds that he only did this brutal rape, kicked someone's door in, and then killed someone in jail? Like, those are the only three things he did his whole life, you know? He's one of these guys I can't help but think there's a longer list, you know?
Yeah, man. It's just crazy how many people this makes me think about how many people are out there just that have committed some brutal crimes in their lifetime and just going about their life. I mean, the fact that this guy did this, which is one of the more disturbing things you've described on the show, and then went on and like had a career in MMA, then went and filmed a movie on a Hollywood set. Like, it's hard to believe that nothing else happened between his arrest and that incident, right? It feels like something would happen, but the fact that these kind of people are out there among us is a scary thought.
The fact that they can like put on a good enough face to like be cunning enough to get into a Hollywood movie and you know what I mean? That's the scary part, is that they have no issues like with this on their conscience, you know? Mm-hmm. They just go on and live like a normal life. It is a scary thing for sure.
Hey, that's wild, man. Wild. Well, Mike, we appreciate you taking us through this. Thank you for the listeners who recommended this. Again, if you have a subject for an upcoming true crime documentary you'd like us to go through, you can always hit us up on YouTube. If you're listening there, leave us a comment, and we'll mark it down and put it on our list. Or you can connect us on Twitter, Instagram, or on our website, distantreplaypodcast.com. Please subscribe to the show, too. We'd appreciate that as well. Continue to help us grow the show as we move forward. It helps us out a lot. Mike, thanks again.
Hey, no problem, guys. And really appreciate the listener suggestions. Keep them coming. Our goal is to keep on bringing you these new episodes every week. And until next time.